prepare for an objective journey into the heart of the legal process. The footage you are about to see remains completely unfiltered and unedited. It is a raw, first-hand account from the front lines of justice, delivered with utmost professionalism and integrity.
Hands on the car. I am FBI, Supervisory Special Agent. This is my home. Don't talk back. I said back around. You're interfering with a federal operation.
At 6:07 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday morning in Fairfax County, Virginia, FBI Supervisory Special Agent Darnell Sutton stepped out of his front door and into the cool air of a neighborhood that was still asleep. He was 44 years old, a 19-year veteran of the Bureau, and one of the most respected counterterrorism specialists operating out of the Hoover Building in Washington. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his FBI credentials secured in a leather case on his hip beside his service weapon. In his right hand, he carried a briefcase containing classified briefing materials for a 9 a.m. meeting with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. His posture was straight, his movements deliberate, the kind of discipline that came from nearly 2 decades in federal law enforcement. Inside the house behind him, his wife, Dr. Vanessa Sutton, a neurologist at Georgetown University Hospital, stood at the kitchen window watching him walk to the driveway. Their 2 children sat at the table behind her, 9-year-old Elijah eating cereal, and 12-year-old Nadia scrolling through her phone before school. It was an ordinary morning, routine, predictable, the kind of morning that didn't make the news. Darnell placed his briefcase in the back seat of his government-issued black Dodge Charger and paused to check his phone. A message from his deputy confirmed the briefing was on schedule. He typed a short reply, slid the phone into his jacket pocket, and reached for the driver's side door. He did not notice the 2 unmarked white SUVs idling at the far end of the cul-de-sac. He did not see the 6 figures seated inside them wearing tactical vests. And he had no way of knowing that the next 11 minutes would dismantle careers, trigger a federal firestorm, and expose a rot inside one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the country. The man behind the wheel of the lead SUV was ICE Enforcement and Removal Operations Senior Agent Victor Briggs. He was 46 years old with 16 years on the job and a reputation inside his field office that supervisors described as aggressive but effective. What that label actually meant was that Briggs ran operations with minimal paperwork, thin probable cause, and a heavy hand. Colleagues who had worked under him used a different term. They called them cowboy operations. Fast-moving, warrant-light raids through residential neighborhoods where Briggs made decisions on instinct rather than intelligence and justified them in the reports afterward. His personnel file carried 7 formal complaints of excessive force filed over the past decade. Not one had resulted in discipline. Each had been reviewed internally and closed with language like unsubstantiated or insufficient evidence to proceed. The kind of phrases that allowed a pattern to continue without anyone taking responsibility for what it meant. His second-in-command, Agent Dale Fenton, 38, sat in the passenger seat beside him. Fenton had been partnered with Briggs for 5 years and had absorbed his methods without resistance. He didn't challenge calls. He didn't ask questions. He followed Briggs's lead the way someone follows a current, without thinking about where it ends. Behind them, 4 additional agents sat in the second vehicle, geared up and waiting for Briggs's signal. The operation that morning was supposed to target an undocumented individual allegedly residing on this street. But the intelligence was flawed. The address on file didn't match any house on the block. A careful agent would have paused, would have verified, would have called it in and regrouped. Briggs did none of that. Instead, he scanned the cul-de-sac through the windshield and made a decision that would end his career. When he saw a black man standing in a driveway in this predominantly white neighborhood, he straightened in his seat. That's our guy. Fenton didn't question it. He never did. The 2 SUVs accelerated up the cul-de-sac without warning, engines breaking the morning silence as they swung hard into position on either side of Darnell's driveway. The first blocked the street end. The second angled across the mouth of the drive, pinning the Charger in place. Doors flew open. 6 agents stepped out in tactical vests stamped with 3 white letters across the chest. ICE. They moved with the urgency of a raid team hitting a confirmed target, spreading across the driveway in a loose formation, hands near their weapons, eyes locked on one man. Darnell turned from his car door and took in the scene in less than 2 seconds. The vests, the posture, the positioning. 19 years of federal training processed the situation before a single word was spoken. He did not reach for his sidearm. He did not step back. He kept his hands open and visible at his sides. Senior Agent Victor Briggs led the approach, his right hand resting on the grip of his holstered weapon, his stride fast and aggressive. He stopped 4 feet from Darnell and looked him up and down. The suit, the tie, the government vehicle, the leather credential case on his hip, none of it registered. Or rather, none of it mattered. Darnell spoke first, his voice calm and clear. "I'm a federal agent, FBI. My credentials are right here on my belt." Briggs didn't look at the credentials. He didn't glance at the Charger's federal plates. He didn't pause. "I need to see your immigration documents." Darnell held his gaze. "I'm a United States citizen. I am a supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is my home." Briggs shifted his weight forward, closing the distance to less than 3 feet. "I'll decide what you are. Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle." Fenton moved to Darnell's left side, his hand mirroring Briggs' position on his own weapon. The other 4 agents fanned out across the driveway in a perimeter, treating the quiet suburban street like an active threat zone. Across the cul-de-sac, front doors began to open. A woman in a robe stepped onto her porch. A man in running clothes stopped at the end of his walkway. The neighborhood was waking up to something none of them had ever seen on their street before. Darnell did not turn around. He kept his hands open, his arms slightly away from his sides, palms visible. Every movement was controlled, deliberate. The practiced stillness of a man who understood how fast situations like this could spiral and who refused to give anyone a reason to escalate. He spoke again, his voice steady and measured. "I am FBI. My credentials are on my hip. My badge and ID are right here. I am asking you to verify my identity before this goes any further." Briggs's expression didn't change. He looked at the credential case the way someone glances at a piece of clothing they've already dismissed. Credentials can be faked. You people buy that stuff online. The words hung in the morning air. Darnell's jaw tightened. A muscle in his neck moved. But his voice remained level. "I want your name, your badge number, and I want to see a warrant." Briggs tilted his head slightly, the way someone does when they've decided the conversation is over. "We don't need a warrant. We have authority." Darnell's tone dropped, still calm, but with an edge of precision that came from years of conducting interrogations on the other side of the table. "You don't have authority to detain a federal officer in his own driveway without cause, and you know that." Something shifted behind Briggs's eyes. Not doubt, not reconsideration. Anger. The kind that came from a man who was not used to being challenged. Especially not by someone he had already decided didn't have the right to challenge him. It happened fast. Briggs grabbed Darnell's left arm and wrenched it behind his back. Fenton seized the right. Darnell did not pull away, did not twist, did not resist in any way that could later be described as aggressive. His voice rose just enough for every neighbor now standing on their porch to hear. "I am not resisting. I am FBI. You are making a mistake." Briggs drove Darnell forward and slammed him face first into the hood of his own government-issued Charger. The sound of his forehead hitting the black metal was sharp and immediate, loud enough to echo off the houses across the street. A woman gasped. Someone shouted. And inside the house, a 9-year-old boy who had been eating cereal dropped his spoon and ran toward the sound of his father's voice. Dr. Vanessa Sutton heard the impact before she understood what it was. A sharp metallic sound followed by raised voices that didn't belong on her street at 6 in the morning. She had been standing at the kitchen sink rinsing a coffee mug when the noise pulled her to the window. What she saw through the glass made her drop the mug into the basin. Her husband was pinned face down against the hood of his own car. 6 armed men in tactical vests surrounded him. Two of them had his arms twisted behind his back. She screamed. The sound cut through the kitchen and reached both children instantly. Elijah, 9 years old, pushed back from the breakfast table and ran toward the front of the house, cereal forgotten. Nadia, 12, moved on instinct sharpened by a generation raised on camera phones. She grabbed her phone from the counter and ran upstairs to her bedroom window, pressed record, and held the frame steady on the driveway below. Vanessa was already out the front door, barefoot on the cold concrete of the porch steps, moving toward the driveway with her hands open and her voice high. "What are you doing? That's my husband! What is happening?" Briggs didn't turn his body. He turned only his head, keeping one hand on Darnell's back, and spoke with the flat condescension of a man addressing someone he considered irrelevant. "Ma'am, go back inside. This is a federal operation." Vanessa didn't stop. She moved closer, her voice breaking, but her words sharp. "I am Dr. Vanessa Sutton. I am a neurologist at Georgetown University Hospital. That man is my husband. He is an FBI supervisory special agent. His credentials are on his hip. What are you doing to him?" Fenton stepped forward, positioning himself between Vanessa and the car. His hand rested on his belt. His tone carried a threat he didn't bother to disguise. "Ma'am, you are interfering with a federal operation. Step back now or you will be placed under arrest." Vanessa froze. Behind her, Elijah appeared in the doorway. His face was red and wet with tears. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching his father's cheek pressed against the hood of the car and the men with guns standing over him. Across the street, a front door opened slowly. Colonel Howard Pratt, 67, retired United States Marine Corps, stepped onto his porch in a bathrobe and slippers. He took one long look at the driveway, reached into his pocket, and pulled out his phone. Colonel Pratt had lived on this street for 12 years. He had known Darnell Sutton for 8 of them. They had shared dinners, their children had played together. He had seen Darnell leave for work in that same Charger hundreds of times, credentials on his hip, briefcase in hand. He did not need to be told what he was looking at. He knew, and what he saw was wrong. Pratt walked across the street with the unhurried pace of a man who had spent decades walking into situations others walked away from. His bathrobe hung open. His slippers scuffed the asphalt. His phone was raised and recording. He stopped at the edge of the driveway and spoke directly to Briggs, his voice carrying the kind of authority that didn't come from a badge, but from 30 years of military command. "That man is FBI. I've seen his credentials with my own eyes. I've sat at his dinner table. You are making a very serious error." Briggs looked at him the way he looked at everyone who challenged him, with contempt framed as authority. "Sir, go back to your house. Now. Unless you want to be charged with obstruction of a federal operation." Pratt didn't move, not a single step. "I am a retired colonel in the United States Marine Corps. I am not going anywhere. And you just threatened a man's wife in front of his children on his own property." Down the street, 2 more doors opened. A woman in scrubs stepped onto her porch, phone already recording. A man in a polo shirt stood at the end of his driveway with his cell to his ear, speaking quickly to a 911 dispatcher. "Yes, there are armed men in tactical vests. They've pinned a man against his car. His wife is outside screaming. There are children. Please send someone now." Briggs scanned the growing audience. 5 houses had eyes on him now. 3 phones were recording. A 911 call was live. The situation was expanding beyond his control, and every second brought more witnesses. But Victor Briggs had never once in 16 years backed down from a decision he had already made. He was not going to start now. He looked at Fenton and nodded once. "Cuff him." Fenton pulled the handcuffs from his belt and locked them around Darnell's wrists. The click was quiet, almost mechanical, but the weight of it carried across the entire cul-de-sac. Darnell Sutton now stood handcuffed, leaning against his own government-issued vehicle, his FBI badge clearly visible on his belt, his credentials still in the case at his hip, in front of his own home, while his son sobbed in the doorway, and his daughter recorded every second from the window above. Colonel Pratt's voice cut across the driveway like a battlefield command. "Check his identification. You have a man in cuffs and you haven't looked at the credentials on his hip? Briggs didn't acknowledge him. He was repositioning Darnell toward the SUV when a voice from his own team stopped him. Victor, maybe we should look at his ID. Agent Luisa Vega, 33, the youngest on the team and the only one who hadn't touched Darnell, stepped forward. Briggs turned, his expression hard. I run this operation. Vega didn't argue. She moved past him, reached for the leather credential case on Darnell's hip, and unsnapped it. The gold FBI shield caught the morning light. She unfolded the identification card beneath it. Darnell Sutton, Supervisory Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Counterterrorism Division. She held the case open toward Briggs. The color drained from her face. Briggs stared at the badge. 1 second, 2, 3. The cul-de-sac was silent except for the quiet sobs of a 9-year-old boy in the doorway. Then Briggs spoke, and the words that left his mouth would be replayed in federal courtrooms and national broadcasts for months. Could be fake. We're bringing him in for verification. Vega stepped back. Her hand dropped to her side. Fenton shifted his weight, looked at the badge, looked at Briggs, looked at the ground. He said nothing. Pratt's voice rose. You just saw his badge. What more do you need? Briggs turned away. Get him in the vehicle. 2 agents took Darnell's arms. He didn't resist. He planted his feet only long enough to speak directly to Briggs, his voice low and precise. You are abducting a federal officer from his own property without a warrant. Every one of you is going to answer for this. Briggs said nothing. They guided Darnell toward the SUV. His daughter's camera followed every step from the window above. Inside the house, Dr. Vanessa Sutton stood with her back against the kitchen counter, phone pressed to her ear, hands shaking. She had dialed the FBI's Washington field office from memory, the emergency number Darnell told her to use only if something went wrong. My husband is Supervisory Special Agent Darnell Sutton, badge number 7741, Counterterrorism Division, Hoover Building. ICE agents detained him in our driveway. He showed his credentials. They don't care. They're putting him in a vehicle right now. A pause. Then the duty officer's tone changed completely. The casual professionalism vanished, replaced by something tight and urgent. Ma'am, did you say Supervisory Special Agent Sutton? Counterterrorism? Yes. Do not hang up. She heard rapid movement on the line, chair shifting, a door closing, a second voice she couldn't make out. 4 minutes later, the FBI's Assistant Director for Counterterrorism was woken at his home in Arlington. He was briefed in under 60 seconds. 6 minutes after that, the director's office was alerted. The incident was flagged as a priority interagency matter involving the unlawful detention of a senior bureau agent by another federal agency. 8 minutes after Vanessa's call, a direct line connected FBI headquarters to ICE's Office of Professional Responsibility. The message was 4 sentences. You have one of our supervisory special agents in handcuffs. He was detained without a warrant at his own residence. He identified himself and you ignored it. Fix this now or we will come fix it ourselves. Meanwhile, Pratt had called the retired 2-star general at the Pentagon. Nadia's video had been texted to her aunt, who forwarded it to 3 more people before the SUV pulled away. 9 neighbors stood outside. 4 phones were recording. A 911 call was logged with Fairfax County Dispatch. And Victor Briggs, driving toward the field office with a cuffed FBI counterterrorism agent in his back seat, had no idea what was cascading above him. Briggs was 3 miles from the field office when his radio crackled. The voice on the other end wasn't a dispatcher. It was ICE Field Director Salazar, and the controlled fury in his tone was unmistakable. Briggs, this is Field Director Salazar. Release the individual immediately. Do not transport. Uncuff him now. Confirm receipt. Briggs gripped the steering wheel tighter. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror where Darnell sat in silence, wrists cuffed behind his back, posture straight, expression unreadable. Fenton shifted in the passenger seat, his hand frozen halfway to the radio. Briggs keyed the mic. "Sir, we have a situation here that requires—" "I said release him now, Agent Briggs. That is a direct order." "You have detained a supervisory special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Uncuff him, return his belongings, and do not move from that location until I arrive. Do you copy?" The radio went silent. Briggs pulled the SUV to the curb on a residential side street 4 blocks from the cul-de-sac. He sat there for a long moment, engine idling, both hands on the wheel. Fenton stared at the dashboard. Neither spoke. In the back seat, Darnell said nothing. He didn't need to. The 2 agents in the trail vehicle pulled up behind them and waited. Briggs finally stepped out, walked to the rear door, and opened it. He unlocked the cuffs without making eye contact. The metal fell away from Darnell's wrists. Darnell stepped onto the sidewalk, rolled his shoulders, and flexed his hands. Red lines circled both wrists where the cuffs had bitten into his skin. He looked at Briggs for a long moment. His voice was quiet, steady, and final. "You had every chance to stop this." Briggs said nothing. He couldn't, because somewhere behind those words was the sound of a career ending, and for the first time that morning, he could hear it. Briggs drove Darnell back to the cul-de-sac in silence. When the SUV pulled into the street, 9 neighbors were still outside. 4 phones were still recording. Vanessa was standing in the driveway with her arms wrapped around herself, Elijah pressed against her leg. Nadia was still at the window. Darnell stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward his family. Vanessa reached him first. She grabbed the front of his jacket with both hands and held on, her forehead pressed against his chest, her body shaking. He wrapped his arms around her and looked over her shoulder at Elijah, whose face was swollen and red. "It's okay. Daddy's okay." It wasn't okay. His forehead carried a bruise from the hood of the Charger. His suit jacket was torn at the shoulder seam. His wrists were marked. His children had watched armed men slam their father against his own car and drag him away in handcuffs. No amount of calm could undo what they had seen. Vega approached from the second vehicle. She stopped a few feet away, her voice low. "I'm sorry. I should have stopped it sooner." Darnell looked at her. "You saw the badge and he still wanted to take me in? You know what this was." Vega didn't answer. She didn't have to. Within 30 minutes, ICE Field Director Salazar arrived with 2 internal affairs investigators. FBI sent 3 representatives, including a legal attaché from the Washington field office. Fairfax County Police responded to the earlier 911 calls. The quiet cul-de-sac became a jurisdictional collision of agencies, badges, and competing authority. Salazar pulled Briggs and Fenton aside near the trail vehicle. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. No one could hear the words, but everyone saw the result. Briggs' face went white. Both agents removed their badges and surrendered their service weapons on the spot. It was 6:53 a.m. The entire encounter had lasted less than 12 minutes. By noon, the case had detonated across 3 simultaneous tracks. The FBI's Inspection Division opened a formal inquiry into the assault and unlawful detention of one of their own agents. ICE's Office of Professional Responsibility launched a misconduct investigation into Briggs, Fenton, and the operational chain that had authorized the morning's action. And the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a federal civil rights investigation into racial profiling, excessive force, and unlawful seizure of a person without warrant or probable cause. Briggs's operational file was pulled within the first hour. What investigators found confirmed what everyone on that driveway already knew. The operation had no warrant, no probable cause, no supervisor sign-off for a residential sweep. The target address listed in the intelligence packet didn't match any house on the block. The entire basis for the stop was Briggs' decision to approach a black man standing in his own driveway in a white neighborhood. Body camera footage from Agent Vega's chest-mounted unit captured the full encounter. Briggs' voice saying, "I'll decide what you are." The phrase, "You people buy that stuff online." The refusal to examine credentials. The slam against the hood. Vanessa's screams. Fenton's threat to arrest her. Elijah crying in the doorway. Every second, every word, every failure preserved in high-definition federal evidence. Internal emails surfaced showing Briggs had been flagged twice in the previous 3 years for conducting warrantless stops of minorities in residential areas. Both times, supervisors reviewed the complaints and declined to act, citing insufficient evidence and operational discretion. Fenton's file revealed he had been Briggs's partner on every single flagged operation. Not once had he intervened. Not once had he filed a contradicting report. That afternoon, the FBI director placed a call to the Secretary of Homeland Security. Sources who were briefed on the conversation described it as the angriest interagency call in recent memory. The director's message was simple: this will not be handled quietly. A federal grand jury was convened in the Eastern District of Virginia within 3 weeks. The speed was unusual. The reason was not. Prosecutors presented the case with methodical precision. Vega's body camera footage played first. The grand jury watched Briggs approach, heard the language, saw the slam, heard the children. Several jurors shifted in their seats. Nadia's phone video played next, showing the scene from above. 6 agents surrounding one man in a suit in his own driveway, a boy crying in the doorway, a woman in a bathrobe being threatened with arrest. 7 neighbors testified. Each account aligned with the footage. Each confirmed that Darnell had been calm, compliant, and clearly identified himself multiple times before force was used. Colonel Pratt took the stand in a pressed blazer with his service ribbons pinned to the breast pocket. His testimony was direct and unshakable. I have known that man for 8 years. I have seen his FBI credentials. I watched 6 armed agents slam him into his own car after he told them who he was. And when his badge was opened in front of their team leader, the man looked at it and said it could be fake. That is not law enforcement. That is something else entirely. Darnell testified last. He recounted every detail with the controlled precision of a man trained to deliver intelligence briefings under pressure. The words, the grab, the slam, the cuffs, his son's face. He said quietly, "I have spent 19 years protecting this country from threats. I never expected the threat to come from another federal badge in my own driveway." The grand jury returned indictments on all targets. Briggs was charged with deprivation of civil rights under color of law, unlawful detention, assault on a federal officer, and conspiracy. Fenton was charged with aiding unlawful detention, failure to intervene, and conspiracy. Briggs's sergeant, who had approved the operation without verifying the address, was indicted on conspiracy charges. All 3 were denied bail. The trial opened before federal judge Diane Holloway in the Eastern District of Virginia. The courtroom was standing room only. Federal agents from both agencies sat in the gallery alongside civil rights attorneys, journalists, and members of Congress who had requested observer seats. Prosecutors played Vega's body camera footage first. The screen mounted above the jury box showed Briggs approaching the driveway, his hand on his weapon, his voice already carrying the tone of a man who had made his decision before he arrived. The jury watched him ignore Darnell's identification, heard him say, "You people," watched Darnell's face hit the hood, heard Elijah crying from inside the house. 2 jurors looked away. One pressed a hand to her mouth. Nadia's video played next. The elevated angle from the bedroom window showed the full scope of the scene. 6 armed agents surrounding a single man in a suit. A woman being threatened on her own front steps. A child frozen in a doorway. Neighbors testified one by one. Their accounts were consistent because the truth doesn't need coordination. Pratt testified in a dark suit with his service medals. His voice never wavered. Agent Vega took the stand and testified against Briggs directly, describing his pattern of racial targeting and her attempt to check the credentials he refused to examine. Briggs' defense argued good faith belief in the operation. Prosecutors dismantled it in minutes. The target address didn't exist on that street. Briggs never verified it. There was no warrant, no probable cause, no legal basis for any of it. The defense tried to characterize Darnell's composure as non-compliant body language. Judge Holloway interrupted from the bench. Standing still and identifying yourself is not non-compliance. Move on. Fenton's attorney attempted to portray him as a follower acting under orders. Prosecutors countered simply. Silence in the face of a civil rights violation is participation. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. Guilty on all counts. Both men. Every charge. Judge Holloway delivered sentencing 6 weeks later, in a courtroom that was once again filled beyond capacity. She read her statement without looking up for the first 4 minutes, her voice measured and deliberate, each sentence landing with the weight of someone who understood exactly what she was putting into the public record. What happened on that driveway was not a misunderstanding. It was not a procedural error. It was a grotesque abuse of federal authority, compounded by racial animus, carried out in front of children, on American soil, against a man who has given nearly 2 decades of service to this nation. She looked up. The system failed Supervisory Special Agent Sutton that morning. It failed his wife. It failed his children. It failed every citizen who trusts that a badge means protection and not persecution. Briggs received 7 years in federal prison. Fenton received 4. The sergeant who approved the operation without verifying the address received 2. All 3 were permanently barred from federal employment. Their law enforcement certifications were revoked. ICE's Enforcement and Removal Operations Division was placed under a federal consent decree requiring independent oversight of all residential field operations. 6 supervisors who had ignored prior complaints about Briggs were disciplined. 2 were terminated. 3 were demoted. 1 took early retirement. DHS issued a formal apology to the Sutton family. The FBI director released a public statement calling the arrest an attack on the Bureau itself and on the dignity of every agent who serves. Darnell filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against ICE, DHS, Briggs, Fenton, and the supervisory chain. The case settled before trial for $4.7 million, plus sweeping policy reforms including mandatory address verification for all residential operations, warrant requirements for all approaches, and a racial bias auditing program with independent civilian review. The money was secondary. The record was permanent. Months later, Darnell Sutton walked through the lobby of the Hoover Building at 8:47 a.m., credentials on his hip, briefcase in hand, the same as every morning before. But when he stepped into the Counterterrorism Division's bullpen, the room went quiet. Then someone near the back started clapping. One person. Then another. Then the entire floor. Darnell stood still for a moment, nodded once, and walked to his desk. He never spoke about the incident publicly. He declined every interview request, every podcast invitation, every cable news appearance. But in a closed-door address to a class of new FBI recruits at Quantico 3 months after the sentencing, he said something that would be quoted in training materials for years. The badge doesn't make you right. The warrant doesn't make you just. Your conduct does. And if the system fails, the people around you, your neighbors, your family, the ones filming from the window, they become the system. Nadia's video, posted by a family member the week after the incident, reached 11 million views. The comments numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Colonel Pratt was interviewed by a national news outlet on his front porch, still in the same bathrobe. He said simply, "I've fought in 2 wars. I know what abuse of power looks like. I saw it that morning, standing in my slippers." Dr. Vanessa Sutton used a portion of the settlement to establish a legal defense fund for families targeted by warrantless immigration enforcement operations. The fund provided attorneys, documentation assistance, and emergency support for households who had no resources to fight back when armed men showed up at their doors without cause. Elijah, now 10, asked his father one evening while they sat on the back porch, "Dad, are you still proud to carry a badge?" Darnell looked at him for a long moment. The bruise on his forehead had healed months ago. The marks on his wrists were gone. But his son's face in that doorway, red and wet and frozen with fear, that image would never leave. "I'm proud of what the badge is supposed to mean, and I'll spend the rest of my career making sure it means that." Back in Fairfax County, the cul-de-sac was quiet again. The Charger sat in the driveway. The porch light was on. And somewhere in a federal records archive, next to the names Briggs and Fenton, a single word was stamped in red ink. Revoked. Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you, right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, a lot of you have told me you're waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. and just lying there. Can't shut your mind off. And the next day, you're dragging through everything. I came across a simple 21-day sleep guide that's helped thousands of people fix exactly that. No pills, no apps, no gadgets, just a step-by-step plan that actually works. It's only $15. I put the link in the description if you want to check it out. All right, I'll catch you in the next one.
In our unwavering pursuit of the truth, accountability is our highest priority. We challenge those in power by presenting undeniable facts, because the records never lie. Thank you for watching and trusting our investigations.